The Hog. When Arthur and Anne were in high school, they fell in love. They were both big, fat, and jolly, and seemed suited to one another. But as sometimes happens, things didn't work out. Arthur moved away and married someone else, and Anne didn't marry anyone. And not too many years later, she got sick and died. Some said it was from a broken heart. One day, Arthur was driving to a small town not far from where he and Anne had grown up. Soon he realized that a hog was following him. No matter how fast Arthur drove, the hog stayed right behind. Each time he looked back, there was the hog. It began to irritate him. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer. He stopped his car and rapped the hog on his snout good and hard. "Get out of here, you fat, dirty thing," he shouted. To his astonishment, the hog spoke to him, and it was Anne's voice he heard. "It's her ghost," he thought. "She's come back as a hog." "I was doing no harm, Arthur," the hog said. "I was just out for a brisk walk, enjoying myself. How could you strike me after all that we've meant to one another?" With that, she turned and trotted away. When you tell this story, have the hog speak in a high voice. Is something wrong? A car broke down late at night, way out in the country. The driver remembered passing an empty house for a few minutes earlier. "I'll stay here," he thought. "At least I'll get some sleep." He found some wood in the corner of the living room and made a fire in the fireplace. He covered himself with his coat and slept. Towards morning, the fire went out and the cold awakened him. "It'll be light soon," he thought. "Then I'll go for help." He closed his eyes again, but before he could doze off, there was a terrible crash. Something big and heavy had fallen out of the chimney. It lay on the floor for a minute, then it stood up and stared down at him. The man took one look and started running. He'd never seen anything so horrible in his life. He paused just long enough to jump through a window. Then he ran and ran and ran and ran until he thought his lungs would burst. As he stood in the road, panting, trying to catch his breath, he felt something tap him on the shoulder. He turned and found himself staring into two big, bloody eyes and a grinning skull. It was the horrible thing. "Pardon me," it said. "Is something wrong?" It's him. The woman was the meanest, most miserable person you could imagine, and her husband was just as bad. The only good thing was that they lived in the woods all by themselves and couldn't bother anyone else. One day they were off somewhere getting firewood, and the woman got so mad at her husband that she grabbed an axe and cut his head off just like that. Then she buried him nice and neat and went home. She made herself a cup of tea and went out on the porch. She sat there rocking in a rocking chair, sipping her tea, thinking how glad she was that she had done this awful thing. After a while, she heard this old, empty voice out in the distance, moaning and groaning, and it was saying, "Who's going to stay with me this cold and lonely night? Who?" "It's him," she thought, and she hollered back, "Stay by yourself, you old goat." Soon she heard the voice again, only now it was closer, and it was saying, "Who's going to sit with me this cold and lonely night? Who?" "Only a crazy man," she shouted. "Sit by yourself, you dirty rat." Then she heard the voice even closer, and it was saying, "Who's going to be with me this cold and lonely night? Who?" "Nobody," she sneered. "Be by yourself, you miserable mole." She stood up to go into the house, but now the voice was right behind her, and it was whispering, "Who's going to stay with me this cold and lonely night? Who?" Before she could answer back, a big, hairy hand came around the corner and grabbed her, and the voice hollered, "You are!" As you say the last line, grab one of your friends. Thump. After Sarah went to bed, she saw a ghost. It was sitting on her dresser. staring at her through 2 black holes where its eyes had been. She shrieked, and her mother and father came running. "There's a ghost on my dresser," she said, trembling. "It's staring at me." When they turned on the light, it was gone. "You were having a bad dream," her father said. "Now go to sleep." And after they left, there it was again, sitting on her dresser, staring at her. She pulled the covers over her head and fell asleep. The next night, the ghost was back. It was up on the ceiling, staring down at her. When Sarah saw it, she screamed. Again, her mother and father came running. "It's up on the ceiling," she said. When they turned on the light, nothing was there. "It's your imagination," her mother said, and gave her a hug. And after they left, there it was again, staring down at her from the ceiling. She put her head under the pillow and fell asleep. The next night, the ghost was back. It was sitting on her bed, staring at her. Sarah called to her parents, and they came running. "It's on my bed," she said. "It's looking and looking at me." When they turned on the light, nothing was there. "You're upset over nothing," her father said. He kissed her on the nose and tucked her in. "Now go to sleep."
You don't even know if they're there?
It's not done yet.
Oh, okay.
But after they left, there it was again, sitting on her bed, staring at her. "Why are you doing this to me?" Sarah asked. "Why don't you leave me alone?" The ghost put its fingers in its ears and wiggled them at her. Then it stuck its tongue out and went. To make this sound, put your tongue between your lips and blow. It's called giving someone the raspberry.